Ezra Tillman, pastor here locally in Flint, Michigan, the First Trinity Missionary Baptist Church. I was introduced to this concept and this work of environmental injustice through the Flint water crisis, and also in partnership with Black Millennials of Flint. I have continued to grow and to learn to see around this country how, in fact, this is institutionalized and how it has been a continual structure. I'm married, got 4 boys, and I also have my nephew with us after the losing of our sister-in-law. But we continue to work here. I'm considered, I guess, an old head millennial. And so I'm trying to make sure I represent well. So God bless you. Thank you.
Awesome. If we can have Reverend Dr. Carroll to introduce yourself.
Good day again, Madam Moderator, to the brethren. Great to be here today. My name is Ambrose Carroll. I'm the proud pastor of the church by the side of the road in Berkeley. That is the name and not the location. Founder of Green the Church, an organization that helps tell the story of African-American congregations in the environmental movement, the work that so many pastors and lay people are doing in community around environmental justice, sustainability, renewable energy, and all of those pieces to kind of ground us. Very glad to be here with us today on Martin Luther King's birthday, and to be a part and to lock arms with those still battling for righteousness in Flint.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And last but not least, we got another Reverend Doctor, Patrick Thompson, if you could introduce yourself.
Greetings, salutations to everybody. I'm sorry I got these headphones. I'm having some technical issue, but I can hear you, and I hope you can hear me. My name is Dr. Patrick Thompson. I am a naturopathic physician, and I'm also a pastor as well. I have a concierge medical practice that focuses on natural medicine and look at general wellness and looking at weight loss and chronic illness. But I also have a component that addresses faith and health issues in the community. And so I do initiatives in communities that do that. I'm also in the process of founding a church called Whole Kingdom Church here in New Orleans, Louisiana. And so I really have been interested in this sort of topic most recently as I heard about my hometown, New Orleans, dealing with so many COVID issues with the comorbidities. And, I'm actually in the process of writing a book about how the Black church in particular can help to mitigate those factors and changes in our community. And so I'm very interested, and I'm very excited to be here. Thanks, Latricia Adams, God bless your whole life for letting me be on here and be with these great men of God, and with yourself, a great woman of God. And I'm excited to be here and to share.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. This is definitely going to be a phenomenal conversation. I would be remiss if I weren't a little bit biased and say Happy Founders Day to all the women of Kappa Alpha sorority and it is fitting, being that Dr. Martin Luther King was a fine man of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity.
Amen. Phi Ski. All right.
So I had to throw that in there before we begin. So with that, so as I mentioned in the opening, talking about Martin Luther King being most known for his work with the Civil Rights Act, as well as the Voters Act, but he was indeed very much so an environmental justice leader. I am actually originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and we know, unfortunately, that's where Dr. King was assassinated. But more than that, the sanitation worker strike in Memphis was monumental. With this particular strike, Dr. King stood side by side men in the city of Memphis advocating for safe and healthy working conditions. that still is an issue that plagues our communities, in the Black and Latinx and Indigenous communities, most especially. So thinking about the role that Dr. King played, fast forward to 2021, what are some lessons that we can take from Dr. King that can be implemented in the modern environmental justice movement? And anyone can be the brave soul to take this first question. If not, I was a teacher, so I'll pick somebody.
Well, I mean, I'll go. I'll go. So, I'm happy that you having this and talking about this topic, because, as you said, there are so many people who reduce the fight and the legacy of Dr. King to the civil rights movement and things of that nature, which is certainly a great, he fought greatly for that. But as you said, he did have some great things to say. I mean, particularly toward the end of his life, about injustice, all over the place. It wasn't just injustice for Black people, but he began to see that it was a worldwide issue, and it was not just a law issue per se, but it was going into a variety of things in life, and including the environment. If you ask my opinion, that was one of the main things. It was okay for him to talk about freeing Black people, but when he started talking about freeing everybody, that's when he had to go. If you notice, that's when that was when they killed him, was when he started addressing issues across the planet. And so when we think, what does it teach us? I mean, I think one of the things, we have to take responsibility to take on that fight. I mean, a lot of times we look at this as something, particularly when the environment, I mean, people, and I hate to say this, but particularly in Black communities, I mean, I don't think it's the most popular thing to talk about the environment. I don't know if everybody's interested in that. But we have to be interested in it, because I think it teaches us that it affects everybody. It affects everybody. We gotta, I think it teaches us that we have to push towards that fight and say something about it. It's not something that we can just push to another other person. I think it also teaches us that this environmental justice is a civil rights issue. It is a civil rights issue. When we talk about racial equality, we talk about human rights, we talk about politics, we talk about health. These things are all linked. And I think this is a central thing, even from a faith perspective. We looked at that, we're not isolated. We're created to be we're created for three purposes: for me to have communion with God, the earth, and with people. And so this is all connected, and I think, lastly, I would just say, I think it teaches us that, the environmental health issue is, it affects everybody. I read something about a New York study that showed that in certain relationships, that the higher the segregation, the worse the air pollution, the worse the water pollution, the worse the noise pollution. These things it affects everybody. So so the reality is, if we can help people to understand that when you suppress people of minorities, minority communities, you're oppressing yourself, because the environment is going to react to that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is really compelling that you mentioned is that environmental justice, while environmental justice was coined, I have to send a shout out to Dr. Robert Bullard, was actually initiated by Black and brown people. What we see in the quote unquote green space is a co-op. So as people started to think about, there is money that's associated with the demise of people of color in polluted communities, we started to see, and it's a trendy word, the Columbusing of the environmental justice movement. And so I think what makes the ministry and connecting spirituality and faith-based leaders with environmental justice issues, we know that Black and brown people really think highly and are very connected to their faith-based leaders. So I don't want to get really long-winded, but I wanted to hear from Pastor Tillman and Pastor Carroll, what has been your experience with connecting to the environmental justice movement from a position of faith.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Dr. Thompson and your last statements concerning about what you're dealing with in the space of helping your own people as a leader, and you finding your way through it. I think that the lessons I've learned, if I can look at the life of Dr. King as the post, March on Washington, who became, not Afro, not Negro, but Black is beautiful. That Dr. King who started to meet with Elijah Muhammad to understand inner city workings of the community and faith-based people that was on the street grassroots making things happen. I think the struggle that I've learned is that you have to have a resilience in your leadership because you have to fight your people to help your people.
Ooh.
If you really are
Stay right there, Doc. Stay right there.
That's
Wow.
That's
really genuine about it, you got to be sure about your calling because it's questionable. It's a lot of wounds, a lot of scars, a lot of sabotage, and a lot of bought leaders within your circle that you do not know until you get into that space. Until you start talking about embetterment, you start talking about challenging the system structures. You find out who has their hand in the government's hand, who has their purse, and who has their way of means of getting up. And you have to wrestle with, well, if this affecting all of us, how you gonna sell your own sheep to get ahead? So for me, that's been the greatest battle for me, watching his life and the latter years of going from the top 100 famous people in the whole world to not even being mentioned within a matter of 4 years of his life. To me, that's been my study and been my reality at, culturally, we got to understand that this is something that has been with us since the slave ships to here. Everybody didn't leave the shores on because of chains and whips. Some people got sold. Right? Some people got to walk right to those chains. So that's been my lesson of learning that you have to learn to do a lonely walk if you're really committed to your convictions about this work, because you will see some folk get exposed.
Yeah.
Man. Listen, again, just glad to be on the call, and just, being here listening to these brethren is a breath of fresh air. Again, sometimes in this work, you feel isolated, as if it is I and I alone. And then the Lord said, no, I got 7,000 more prophets that I've called to know that, individuals are doing the work. And the reality is we've been doing this work. This has always been a part of who we are. From, most of us come from places in the South where agriculture was king, and to be the clergy person was also to be the farmer, right? The same individual who was the deacon is the same person that bought everybody some greens when stuff came up. So our connection and connectivity to the land is a deep part of who we are, and it is a trick of the enemy as we have moved into the urban environments and into places where, a few decades later, we live in what they call a food desert, and our grandparents probably roll over in their grave if they thought that we couldn't get no greens called Safeway clothes. You know what I mean? These things don't make sense. In terms of who we are and what we know about the land. We're really not new to this. We ought to be true to this. We do this. This is what we do. Reality is there are a lot of farmers walking around Detroit, walking around Oakland, California with their pants down. They farmers, they just don't know it. They just haven't had their hand in the soil, not in the dirt, in the soil, and understand the life-giving power within that. I think, this piece and what King, the life of King instructs me, coming up, I'm a Generation Xer, right? So, by the time, they made that Malcolm X movie, they had showing a different world. All of us was in college, man. We were the church and militant. And, looking around at life and what it does. But I'd always ask a question, what would be our large tent movement of my generation as the civil rights movement was for the generation before us? Because there were so many different organizations working in different ways, whether it's SCLC or the Black Panther Party of Defense, right? Of CORE or SNCC. You had a lot of people working, but they were working under what seemingly to us historically was one umbrella. And when I heard Van Jones talking and read his book, The Green Job Economy, I said, boom, this is a large tent issue, I felt, of our day. because the reality is, Bible says the earth is the Lord's and
That's
the
it.
fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell within. The problem that we are asleep on issues of the environment is because a lot of us still live in the world, and the world is kind of man constructed, and we're missing the earth. We are missing the planet, but the earth is the Lord's. And I think one thing that King did and the generation with him is that they organized. I heard today Reverend Gerald Durley of Providence in Atlanta buried his wife today, one who walked with King, but one who has been standing up on this environmental piece for the last 15, 20 years as a voice crying in the wilderness. But the reality is that these things are not apart. All of us in every city, somebody's fighting an energy company, somebody, some church bought some land and then we're told that the land, you couldn't construct your building on the land because the gas thing moved out. So we are dealing with these issues as they come. But I think it's about organizing and dealing with them together and really speaking truth to power. So I think, what I get from that movement, what it instructs us to do is connect with the people that God is calling in this movement, and why I'm glad to be called on this call today, because I think this is really what it's all about, the power of our togetherness.
And that is such a perfect segue, the power of togetherness. And I think oftentimes when we say togetherness, while it is very important and imperative to have allies in this work, it is simultaneously important for the persons that are represented in the communities that are actually being impacted to be on the forefront of advocacy. And so with that, transitioning just a little bit, so of course, in addition to the remarkable things that Dr. Martin Luther King did during his short time on earth, he was also a political advocate. So some of the environmental legislation that exists now has correlations and connections back to the very policies that Dr. King advocated for. So for example, with the Voters' Rights Act, with the Civil Rights Act, there are huge implications and impacts on the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. How can we still utilize those same political advocacy tools? So we're moving from, Dr. King, the moral leader, but how can we use some of those strategies around political advocacy to advocate at the federal level to dismantle environmental racism?
I would say that I think that as he approached those conversations in those spaces, everyone was clear about what he stood for. And I think if we as spiritual leaders, as moral leaders to our communities, if we really take our callings serious and we actually take our positions as being advocates for our constituents, our community, our parishioners, as being a voice, a prophet, speaking, as we said, truth to power, we have to be as bold with the politician as we are in representation of that cross, that Bible on Sunday morning. And I think that gives some balance for true transformation to take place, because there's a standard that's here. And I think that cost is too costly for some people, because either you're going to be drawn into a circle or boxed out of a circle. Because if you can't be that person that is manipulated and used for a platform, as we know, many of our communities right now are being challenged and being infiltrated by those who are trying to use preachers to push this vaccine. There's a cost to turn your pulpit into a platform. And for too often, that has been a means and a way of how we compromise that voice of a king in those areas and times versus now. It's good when you're on TV in front of the camera. However, how many people have you led to the slaughter because you got a photo op? I think that conviction that King had and that standard he had was known across the board in the church life, in the community life, as well as it was in the government.
Wow, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I completely agree with Pastor Tillman. I mean, I think one of the things we got to just, connect with is the fact that, one of the things that, what we've seen happen to our Black and Brown communities was not by accident.
Right.
You know, and I think that, you know, there is a recognition that if you disconnect the people from the land, as you were talking about earlier, you disempower them, you disenfranchise them. And so what I think that is that we have to be just as purposeful as they were in disconnecting us, as we are reconnecting ourselves.
That's right.
And so in that sense, when we think about, you know, how is it that, you know, we can utilize King's progress, you know, and you know, I think we have to emulate his methods, and it goes back to what one of you were saying a second ago. You know, there's going to have to be some organizing, and in that organizing, we have to be prepared for a struggle that goes with that. And with that being said, we can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. We got to be that voice that leads the people. And you know, as a man of faith, but also as a, you know, man of science as well. You know, I look at Dr. King's work, and I kind of see him as an environmental injustice scientist. I kind of see him as that, because, you know, simply what he did, you know, in terms of the scientific method. You look at the scientific method, you see, you observe some things in the world, and then you ask some questions about it.
That's right.
And so he was observing in the world the injustice that we were seeing, and he began to ask some questions. Yeah. And those questions began to ruffle some feathers. There's a cost. They were ready to go to jail. We got to be prepared to do it. Yeah. You know, and as we can see as what's going on in the world right now, those folk ain't scared of that. You know, and we got to be prepared that there's a cost there. And you know, what that means is that, you know, we gotta be on the lookout in our communities. We can't sit idly by, you know, especially in the church. You know, there are some people that I discovered in the church that want to keep politics away from the faith, the community of faith. But I would dare say that we are called to be involved in it. And it is our duty, it is a God command that we look out for justice in the world. You know, I was a student at Morehouse. I graduated from Morehouse, and I remember one of the things that we were taught, even if it wasn't a direct saying, that we were taught that wherever we are, and perhaps this is where King gets it from, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we ought to be on the lookout for injustice. And if you see it, you need to say something.
Yes, sir.
No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you ought to say something about it. You know, and I read somewhere earlier, I think it was last night, I was just kind of looking at some things. Somebody said that, you know, we think about what is our environment. Our environment is wherever we live, wherever we work, wherever we pray, and wherever we play. That's your environment. Right. And we ought to be, and we have to look out in those places, and we got to point out those instances and be ready for the backlash. It is what it is. But like I said, we got to be as purposeful in doing that work as it was as purposeful in taking those or disconnecting our communities.
You said something, Doc. I want to jump in for Doc Carroll go real quick, but that piece about, as we said, right? That cost, that commitment, and that confusion in our community is to talk the same talk, right? We know that most of our communities are informed through faith-based, church, mosque, whatever. And if we have a mixed message ourselves, whatever, it makes it worse in the street. Fog in the pulpit, confusion in the pew. So that issue is continue to be a problem because we don't talk the same talk. And mainly in view of why we speak of injustice is because we haven't been preached to about injustice. We preached about the gospel, salvation, but not injustice. We didn't see Moses as the liberator, as active as we did of let my people go.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's I mean, and again, I listen, I respect the pulpit. I respect people are called, people are formed differently. Some people are great evangelists, and you know, some people are great pastors, you know, good to be in the room. I think that this mantle is a prophetic mantle. And and while I think you know, while this is my mantle at the church by the side of the road, I still got to figure out how to preach. I got to have some I got to have some passion for preaching, right?
Yes, sir.
I got to have some passion for pastoral care. But it is this prophetic mantle that we want to make it easier for others to be educated about and to know how to move. The reality is sometimes we are so comfortable in our environments that we don't even know that we are being disrespected. I grew up in Oakland in what's called the Deep East Oak, 98th and E. And a part of that environment is it was the industrial landscape. It is not in the hills, it's down in the flats. It's by the water and the train tracks. And they have Nabisco, Granny Goose, all kind of industry going on. And so when I woke up in the morning, I love the smell of Granny Goose potato chips in the morning, even though there was a level of toxicity, right, in that, right? In our communities is also where the toilet of the community is, right? And all those things, all those smells, those senses that we live with, when we come into it, it's like, oh man, it's good to be home. You know, it's like the guys, you know, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. We get used to it, right? But it's killing us, right? And it is the prophet, it is the preacher, it is the community that needs to stand up and say, no, this isn't right. To say, no, we are dying because of asthma. Know that where you have us and where you have placed us, and even in California, as liberal and open as we are about big oil and big industry, there are laws on the books in Texas that protects communities, kind of how close these toxic places can be to schools, right? That we don't have those laws in California. So Black and brown people in the interior, in Fresno, right, in Bakersfield, are living, right, with these cancer-causing agents. I have a pastor, Lynn Herron, in Sacramento, right where the Capitol is. She has 3 or 4 children that have childhood cancer because of the level of toxicity. And Sacramento is the capital. Somebody told a lie one day, I think. That, so again, we talk about how it should be and the agreements and, you know, everything. And in America, you've got a right to do everything. And yes, by God's grace, some of us get to, you know, go to school and some of us get to have some experiences. But the agreement is that African Americans, Black people as a caste, hold the bottom of the barrel. And everybody been eating off of us for far too long.
Oh, y'all preaching in here today, pun intended. Just so many gems that you all dropped there. Just so powerful. I think that, you know, I just want to reiterate how important it is to think about environmental justice, not in a silo, but our environment, like what Dr. Thompson talked about, is just so interconnected. There is a young lady, Leah Thomas. She's actually from California as well. And this young lady, she's on the, I'm trying to think, she might not even be a millennial. She might be Gen Z. So forgive me, I'm not sure, because I'm also on the other end of the millennial spectrum. But the young lady coined this concept of philosophy called intersectional environmentalism. And when you think about Dr. King, he embodied that. So when he thought about an injustice, it was so interconnected. He was so attentive to the nuances of injustice. And I think that's what makes him one of the most prolific leaders that the world has seen. But with that, I want to shift gears a little bit. Now, this one, I'm not going to say that it's controversial, but I'm going to speak the truth on this. So we know for Martin Luther King Day, there are all sorts of community outreach programming that goes on, not just in the United States, but internationally as well. However, when you think about the way that oftentimes white liberals portray Dr. King is very much so connected to his rhetoric and strategies around nonviolence. However, towards the latter part of his life, he had a major focus and was very vocal about Black economics. So it's one thing to be free based on paper. It's another thing to talk about liberation and freedom from an economic and financial perspective. So with that, one of the main components on the campaign trail for the presidential election was around a green economy. So thinking about that and the connection with this incoming Biden-Harris administration, how can MLK's vision surrounding Black economics show up in this new green economy focus?
I think that it has to start within our community, as in us seeing ourselves in place of power and authority and ownership. I think now this concept of entrepreneurship is everybody to get a business to make some money, but not really make community. And I think what has opened my eyes about Dr. King's intersectional revivalism piece is seeing how when he went to Chicago in 65, 66, and he went there to address the housing and the education and the pollution and so on and so on. People don't talk about that he went there to make provisions and ways for employment. And one of the major pieces that started that was Operation Breadbasket, that led people into the industry of marketing and milk drivers, et cetera. And over that period of time of a few months, over 2,000 some people, Blacks got jobs, right? But because we were so caught up in the tension of politics of we don't want you here, we didn't look at what he did to our community, and the people in the community who were benefiting from it were split in their vision of how they support him as well. It's a very strange space when we look at when you get to actually seeing someone actually in that seat other than the white man that's calling the shots, that's making the connections, that is not one of us, because we don't have the seat ourselves and we're not invited to the table ourselves, or you're taking shine away from me because we're territorial. It's a whole crab in the bucket concept that continues to, as Dr. Carroll said earlier, perpetuate itself because it's already it's the same playbook. Yeah. It's the same playbook. Every time you got a metropolis of Black folks successful, it's somebody playing into it being broken down from your own. And I think that's part of that puzzle about how we see moving forward, whatever, is that we got to have a clear picture of ourselves and seeing ourselves in that position to support it. It's don't die, we make you a hero. Let's support you while you're alive.
Right.
It was a drop mic on that one. So give people their flowers while they're still here.
That is really hitting. When you start talking about economics, money, right? Not a handout. We're going to come to the table, whatever, organize to make sure this same community is going to be industrial, it's going to grow, it's going to bloom. We don't want to come take over and gentrify our area and then give us a struggle to move back in the same community that you didn't push us out of because we can't pay our taxes. No, we want someone that's going to build something that's going to sustain us in this community. And usually, and I'm in Flint and I watch it and it makes me sick that every time someone get in that position, then we go after them as if they're our enemy. We try, we get somebody actually in seat that can help us and bring change and transformation in our community, whatever. And then we are the ones who's leading the campaigns to get him back out of office.
Yeah, but we got some help though, Doc.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to clarify, in my view, what is MLK's vision about Black economics, and I read a few things, that kind of clarified that for me, and I want to share that, he, going back to 1957, King was condemning, what he called the tragic inequalities of an economic system, which takes necessities from the masses to give luxuries to the classes. And so, he's looking at that. And so when King looked at that, he's saying, listen, this stuff is violence to the Black and brown communities. It's violence. When you deny those economic opportunities and you destroy what they have already built themselves purposely, that's violence. He was saying poverty is violence. He was saying unemployment is violence. He was saying that lack of education is violence. He was saying that hope is violence. And so we got to be purposeful, as I said before, in reversing these things. We got to have a mindset, like Pastor Tillman was saying, that the people will be able to take advantage of that. But when we talk about, well, how does this inform the Biden-Harris administration? Listen, this Green Initiative needs to focus on helping Black and brown communities.
That's right.
Listen,
that's right.
And I got to say this parenthetically, because what we're seeing right now is a backlash for, we say Black Lives Matter. There are those, who feel like we're saying violence towards other lives, but that's not what we're saying. Now, when they say white power, they're saying down with the rest of y'all. Well, that's not what we're saying. We're just saying stop killing us. That's right, sir. I'm just going to say that. So what this should look like is, look, in this Green Initiative,
there needs to be jobs that are going, very proportionately to disadvantaged communities. We got to have initiatives with this green thing to provide relief from food deserts, as was mentioned before, giving people a means of self-sufficiency, in disadvantaged communities. And it also looks like, in incentivizing Black and brown farmers, creating gardening spaces in urban areas to empower the people to be self-sufficient and not just consumers, right? We gotta be purposeful in providing those things and teaching the community. And this is where the faith leaders can come in, is helping them to learn that, hey, this is how we ought to live. We can't depend on Safeway for the greens, right? We can grow them jokers in the backyard.
Amen.
Right? We don't have to worry about groceries. I mean, we can grow stuff in our community and be sufficient. And this is what I think. I think that King would want us to go in this direction. Because I think that would be a game changer and a field leveler.
I think you made a comment, Dr. Carroll made a comment earlier about the land, and some of that land, that soil is soiled. So you can't farm it, but you can, if it pertains to green, you can put programs in our communities that allow us to put some solar panels or something out there, whatever, for other forms of getting energy in our community that will lessen our bills that we got to pay for the lights that we got a monopoly on anyway, that said, because you got us on a meter that you don't read and you estimate to give us a bill. Right, you can help us with using that land for things like that. It's going to help our communities.
Yeah, that's right. I think this thing of economics is powerful. The Great Migration. Our folk didn't leave Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Now we got great church in Chicago. We had great church out here in California. Great church in Michigan. But our folk didn't go to these places to go to church. They came to these places to work.
Right, there you go.
You know what I mean? And once they worked, it had some money. Then they sent for the preacher. Somebody say, "Amen."
Come on.
But
that's right.
Oftentimes.
It's still economics and the tear down of the communities. I know here in the Bay Area in the 80s when they got mad and Ronald Reagan got mad and we saw the growth of the Panthers and the growth of the educational center, they destroyed the middle class African-American centers. They destroyed our centers of commerce, right? They purposefully shut down the military base. They destroyed the economic base. And if you can have a Marshall Plan that rebuilds Hitler's Germany, then certainly you can do what you have to do to rebuild and restructure and make sure that people have work and make sure that we rebuild this infrastructure of this country. There's no reason why these things should not happen. And as we're talking about clean energy, we want to make sure that when you move from a dirty energy economy to a clean energy economy, that Black folk are not at the bottom of the rail, because we can have a clean energy economy and we can still be poor and broke and outside of industry. And so we want jobs, but we don't want jobs. We want industry. And that's why the churches have to come together and we have to create our own industry around solar. We have to create our own industry around renewable energy. We have young people who are doing STEAM, science, technology, engineering, agriculture, arts, mathematics. We have to make sure that our young people are involved, and we have to make sure that the government, and I thank God for this new administration, and I know it's giving folks heart attacks and all kind of stuff, right? If I thought that America was for white people and Black people was at the bottom, and all of a sudden you've got a Native American woman over there in Tyranny, you giving it all back. You know what I mean? I'd be upset too if that was my way of thinking. But we really have to make sure that we're coming together, and then we do have, and I'll say this, that our internal struggle is a real struggle.
Yes, sir.
You cannot talk about Martin Luther King without talking about Reverend Dr. J.H. Jackson, president of the National Baptist Convention, USA Incorporated.
Come on, Reverend.
That King was a young man in his 30s, and there is some reality. There's some coming to the table. Somebody has to write some books about what actually happened with that relationship, to the point where when they made Martin Luther King street in front of his church, he changed the address and put it on the other side. We got to talk about what was J.H. Jackson doing when King came to town. We don't want to act as if J.H. Jackson was not already doing, did not already have political connectivity, was not already working for the people in a certain way. So sometimes we run over one another. And as most of you all know, that not only split their relationship, but it split the entire convention, right? We got a whole new Progressive Baptist convention out of that because of us not being able to get into the room like we are today and have the hard conversation. So I think we got to revisit that. We've got to look at that. You know, me as somebody from Generation X, sometimes I look at stuff, what happened in the 70s, you know, and I started saying, oh man, who sold out for what? And I got to hush my mouth because I wasn't there and I don't know how hard it was. You know, I don't know that part of the struggle. Somebody got to tell me, you know. And so that's some of the hard work that I think that we ought to do with the elders and my generation. You know, I really feel like our generation is here to pass the baton. Generation X, Generation Z, and what's the next one? They said Generation Alpha. I said, what's Alpha? You know, that's a 6-year-old, 7-year-old. They coming, right? So we have to be ready to pass the torch in a way that our elders perhaps did not. We have to empower early.
Dr. Carroll, you open it up, but you can't close it up because her question was about how do we live that legacy of Dr. King presently now as it pertains to the incoming president, et cetera, as it pertains to green in our communities. And that's the issue because J.X. Jackson's position and Dr. King's position after Nobel Peace Prize, after March on Washington, after boycott, he's the man, he's the top Black voice in the country, right? You got National Baptist Convention, he got the world, right? He comes to your city and you get used for your political gain, whatever you have, that you pull preachers against him, your community against him, businessmen in the community, whoever's on the radio, and you put a war in your own city against him trying to help you, then he has the national voice. He been to the White House. You ain't been to the White House, right? He has accomplishments, right? And that's the issue about when it starts talking about what is our same talk? What is our acts? What is it saying that we say must be done in our community? And you talk to different preachers, different circles, and there's different stories, and you say, I won't even talk to you because I want to make sure that I'm pushing my organization over my people. Today, you ask me, Progressive and National Baptist Convention ought to get back together because all of us.
That's right. I agree.
And now, after Dr. King dead, you're saying, well, he was right. Well, where you had your head at in the ground somewhere was you living at then. It was the same issue that you was struggling in, right? You know, we listening to on the radio, keep on pushing, and you struggling or whatever, but then you don't want to line up with the man who's saying, give us freedom, right? The same problem in 21 as it was in 65. The same problem, the same struggles, the same structures, the same being bought. What I'm losing, you don't come in my city and get recognition. So use my French, but the hell with everybody else, you can't get the badge. I'm the man here.
We know that. We know.
Of everybody dying, right? We know the. You got anybody got family in Chicago?
No.
They will tell you the struggle from first migration, second migration to the day of how that city is the same place it was when you came. They still got rat problems, roaches problem, bed bug problems, high water issue. It's the same thing 60 years later. How do you do that? What that happens at? You gonna pit me with the same move? What we doing at? In Black America. So now we watching a Black woman go to the seat of vice president or whatever. So we asking ourselves, okay, Kamala, this is what we need done, flat out.
Yes, sir.
In every inner city.
Yes, sir.
Who's a trusted voice? Who's the organization that has the integrity to carry it out? I'm gonna shut up.
No, man, I think that's it.
You open this up. You did it.
Doc, I think that's it, man. I think it's about power and courage. And this thing, you know, we've been talking about these generations, millennials, and when can I go and who's going to pass the torch. The reality is the torch is God-given, and we've got to stand and speak. We can't wait for somebody. This guy told me once, man, and it took me about 5 years to figure out what he was saying. He said, Ambrose, you got to get out of line. He said, stop waiting, right, for somebody to put their hands on you. You in line, but the Lord is talking, you got to get out of line and get it done. I think that's the spirit of the prophetic, Doc.
listen what you just said, man. That's been taught to
Yes,
us about the ways and forms of how to get. Wait your turn.
That's it.
Faithful, and the Lord will bless you, right? But
Mhm.
we keep forgetting the forerunner of Jesus was a wild man in the desert, right?
Come
He
on.
didn't come out the temple.
Come
He
on.
didn't come out the synagogue. He was in the
Come on.
woods,
Come
right?
on.
Dreads.
Mhm.
And he didn't have no
No lines.
He had camel hair, eat honey and locusts, man.
come on, Doc.
Mhm.
Right? The hand of the Lord was on that man's life, and Jesus says there was none like unto him.
None like him.
Mhm.
But the truth is, the people follow it. But where was the other
Come on.
clergy that supported the prophet?
Uh-huh. That's
Who
it.
was saying we were John, right? John was
Mhm.
by himself.
Woo. So, Doc,
That's the collection plate.
pass it, Doc. Pass it. Which says, you can't wait on them, Doc. That's it.
Get out of the line.
I'm glad I'm on mute because I'm over here about to shout. I'm glad I'm in a space by myself because that'll preach.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, I'm so glad that you brought up the whole issue around the intergenerational organizing, and we are seeing a repeat of that same conflict in modern day. So with that, and this is a really perfect segue to this, you all framed this question so perfectly. So when you think about young people, and when we say young, it's so relative. So I didn't even know about this alpha generation, or whatever the name of it is.
Yeah,
I'm
you
like,
taught
who
me
comes
something,
up with
Doc.
these names? But thinking about our young people, so our youth, like in high school, our college students, our folks that are just, grown, but not all the way grown. What are some pieces of advice that you have for these young people, not just around the presidential election? So yes, we celebrate these young people did that. They got out, they voted, but how do we keep young people engaged in the democratic process, not just at the federal level, but at the state level and the local level? How do we keep our young people engaged?
I think that we got to make space for them. And as controversial as it's been in our picture, one of my mentors shared with me that he had ordained, I think, a 15 to 16-year-old as deacon. I was like, junior deacon? I said, no, a deacon. He said, why can you be a kid preacher and you can't be a kid deacon? All right. So I had to read. Look, all of us complain about the young people ain't here. We ain't got no room for them. They got this, but you got this little box they're in because you won't celebrate who they are. And this, the complex of those generations, is that they have their issues of finding themselves, us affirming them, us celebrating them, right? Us saying about, listen, you are not only next, it's your season now to be innovative. It's your room now for you to take on the world. But we're not trying to make sure that we're helping the foundation of the child versus just give them a free platform to run, because usually what happens is they get the entitlement concept. Then it's a clash because now you innovative, you strong, you powerful, you gifted, but you disrespectful to your elders. So that in between picture of how actually do we interlink it, we have to make sure the foundations are equal across the board and still celebrate that this is your space. This is where you operate at. You teach me. You teach me how to run this Facebook. I'm gonna teach you how to make these black eyed peas right. Huh? I'm gonna teach you how to make that Mrs. Cornbread up. You don't need no Jiffy. I'm gonna show you how to make it from scratch, right? Right. And for some reason, it's a breakdown of actually doing that part of affirming and making it inclusive.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. In my various opportunities in ministry, particularly when I used to be a college pastor at Duke University, and one of the things that I learned there was I could plan all kind of activities to try to engage them, but they wouldn't really come unless they planned it.
Wow.
And but that actually helped me a lot to make my job a lot easier. but I share that to say, I think Pastor Tillman is right. We have to give them a seat at the table. And I think while we do that, we have to encourage them to embrace the differences between the generations. You have to understand Generation Z and Generation Alpha have been shaped in some very, very unique ways. They don't know a world without technology. They don't know a world before the internet. They don't know a world without certain, without, some of them have never seen a white president before Trump, right?
That's true.
So they're being shaped in such a way that the reality is that they will probably see the world in a way that any of us are even capable of seeing it.
That's right.
And they will probably have jobs that don't even exist on this planet yet.
That's right.
And so in that sense, we have to empower them to embrace what has been put inside of them and how they've been uniquely prepared for such a time. And there are so many people who condemn them and say they ain't right and they ain't falling in line like we said. But let me tell you something. These young people are prepared for such a time as this, and some of them do not know it yet.
Yeah.
They will be able to change things and do things and accomplish things that are coming directly from a mantle, a God-given mantle. But we've got to allow them to be who they are. Now we're not saying be loose cannons now.
Right.
But that's the problem.
We are the guide. Right.
That's the problem. Their freedom is because their mindset's totally different. And it's going to be. We talking about, hey, let's get out here and march. They like, no, let's get our guns. They come for me.
Yeah.
I ain't going to no poll. They come, so that's the breakdown, like the foundational
that passes all understanding.
That's the piece. That's where it's at.
It's a delicate balance, right?
Right.
I think we have to be able to harness that energy and what they're doing in that perspective. And I say harness it under the tutelage and sort of guiding of someone who's been around.
It's going to cause us. It's going to take us to a different level of faith.
Absolutely.
Right? The reality is, it was hard. Well, I think my mom was all right. It was hard, boy, the first time I drove across country by myself. I was 18, 19 years old. Now, they wanted me to have freedom, but they didn't know if I could do that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, so, but they had to go ahead and have a little faith. They, know, and I didn't even have a cell phone then. They couldn't even call me on the cell phone, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have to empower them, and then we're going to have to let them go, which means some of the things that they do are definitely going to be unorthodox. Some of the things that they do are going to be things that we wouldn't think about doing. Some things that they do may even be dangerous, right? But we live in a dangerous time, right? We don't live, when I came in 1980 or whatnot, they talked about Martin Luther King, that was good. Everybody was getting the King Day. All that was behind us. That's not our reality. We got a different reality. That's stuff that they got to think about that we don't even have, that we won't even think about. Man, my 13-year-old said this of my 7-year-old the other day, because she was on YouTube. They get a lot of screen time. It probably ain't good. I don't know. And but she said she gonna be an influencer.
Yeah.
I said,
what is that?
What is that? Right.
An influencer, and how she gonna be that? like
it is real.
YouTuber.
So, right, Doc. So the only thing, what I'm hearing in my spirit, that's the word for the next generation, is go ye into all of the earth, right? I think our generation, I think these young people have to go. And I think we think about the states and we think about national, but we've got to go into all the world and get a new perspective on what it means to be human and what humanity is. Because locked into this, American CNN kind of view of the world is not the totality of reality of what's going on. And my hope and prayer is that after this pandemic, after we've seen a generation, man, our kids been in the house for 9 months. I wasn't in the house for 9 months at 12, 11. I don't know what that's going to do to them. I do know it's been a time for a lot of innovation and perhaps some productivity. And we have to be in prayer and trust God, right? And be able to let go.
I agree with him. And I think that as he said that point about spending that time with them, I think that's going to have to be being human, hearing them, sharing experience may help to encourage the democratic process of them doing their part as well, because they're not asleep and they don't see the world different we are, because they don't understand oppression unless they read a book about the Dr. King story. We know about it, but like you said, when they was born, David saw a black man in the White House.
That's right. That's right.
They don't know why Big Mama was crying.
That's all they know.
Why she was happy like that, and they don't get that, right? So
Mhm.
I think that is the major piece about what we have to do, because after a King, a Jesse Jackson, an Al Sharpton, who's next?
Right.
Who develops them to continue that same journey?
Ezra Tillman.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Yes, sir. Call it.
I didn't know how to work that.
Hey, so.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left, and I do want to address a really good question that is a good. Can y'all believe that our time is up? Ooh, this was so good.
That was quick.
I know. So we have a question from London. Ooh, yes, come through the UK.
Oh, wow.
And so the question is, in what ways can Black communities step into the role as stewards of the earth? I love that question, as stewards of the earth. So last words before we actually transition out. And one quick thing, I wanted to say thank you to our partners. I forgot to mention that at the very beginning. I can't let us go without doing that, to the Environmental Defense Fund, who has been such a phenomenal ally and support. I specifically want to give a shout out to Miss Elise Nelson, who is a phenomenal sister, who actually created this whole platform and concept of the Green Table Talk. Bragged on her, she probably didn't know that was coming. And of course, with Green the Church, phenomenal work. I'm so excited. I'm fangirling a little bit over here to have you on. But just to close out with that question, how can we, as a Black community, be better stewards of the earth?
Man, for me, I think it's about renewal. I think it's about remembering who we are. We are Aboriginal people. We've been caring for the planet much longer than recorded civilization cares to even talk about. We've been present, and we're present on every continent on this globe. We know how to do it. And so I think from a practical standpoint, it's getting back to things that we have forgotten. It's getting back to herbal medicines. Is back to some of those things that grandma and them knew that they stopped talking about in church because somebody told them that was voodoo, right? But it's about getting back to the essence of who we are. And I like that shirt, brother. We got to decolonize the environment.
Yes, sir.
We got to we got to decolonize the Black church, right?
Yes,
We got to decolonize some of our theology that so and
Absolutely.
go back further. Thank you.
That's been my birthing concept of it, is my challenge of not being aware of preaching a white theology, right? You got your slants and tones of how you feel and what you experience, whatever, but your concept is not really true. And we've seen it throughout. And I think the answer is you got to preach it, you got to teach it, and we have to exemplify it. I think as of lately, I heard on a post, I think Dr. Jamal Bryant shared that with all the land he has there in Lithonia, whatever, as one of the highest community areas, I guess, the churches that has tons and tons of acres.
Oh, yeah.
Turn that into farmland.
What you say?
Right.
Yeah.
Acres the community that is right. So everybody talking about, oh, that big church over there, and that big church over there is teaching you how to get back to your roots. Yes. Get back to land. I think many of us are surviving right now because we went back to taking echinacea, vitamin C.
That's it.
And we ain't had no vaccine. We ain't had no shots. They would send us back home. We had Tylenol, and we had to eat this fruit. Come and get back to what we knew. Big Mom. So casserole. Come on,
yes, sir.
Get back to clean that system out to get us back to our roots. We have to exemplify that, as you said, change our theology, because we put that in the minds of people.
Yeah. And let me say, listen, that's the kind of medicine I do. So come holler at me. I can hook you up.
I hear you.
I'm here. I'm with you. And so let me just say this. So even with that said, I mean, I'm agreeing with everything you guys are saying, and what I'm hearing is we have to begin to shepherd the people to shift back into a producer mindset rather than consumer.
Preach, Doc. That's it.
Because they're so. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine that was just kind of, she said something to me about, oh, I need to get these Gucci slides, and I was just like, man, look. Them slides don't even look that good, to be paying all this money for. We got to get out of that consumer thing. Oh, I done made it now that I can buy something else from somebody else's factory and give them my money.
Come on, man.
We can bring it to our own house,
Devil
our
is a
own
lie.
communities, our own church, and we can grow it in our backyards, and we can use what we produce.
That's right.
Yes,
And we got to, because the reality is, again, it's been a purposeful shifting of our minds to that consumer.
Right.
That's
And
it.
we got to be purposeful again to shift our people's minds to producer,
Thompson.
instead of consumer.
Yes,
All
sir.
right.
Yes,
Well,
sir.
y'all, I hate to end this conversation. We got to do this again. We
I
got to
mean,
do this
yeah.
again.
Yeah.
It can't
We
end
should.
here. We should. We should.
I'm down. Let me
All
know.
right. Well, you know I'll reach out to you, and I'm persistent, so I'll find you.
Amen.
Well, thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation. Again, my apologies for this technology issue that happened a little bit earlier. We'll have the recording posted on our YouTube site. And with that, you all have a wonderful Friday and an even better weekend. Thank you all so much.
Bless you. Thank you.
All right, bless you.
Nice to meet you,
God bless
brother.
Bless you all.
All right now.
It was a pleasure, brethren.
Yes, sir.
Pleasure.